And the idea is to figure out why exactly, what's the point of being a monastic? Because sometimes people don't really get why people want to shave their hair and wear funny clothes, because it doesn't seem all that, you can do it anyway probably, just by being a punk or something like that. So why do this? And what is the point of this is really the purpose of the talk today. And if you do get really inspired afterwards, I'm sure we can organize, helping you out afterwards to kind of do the right thing and move in the right direction. No, that's not really the purpose. The purpose is just to kind of get a deeper understanding of what Buddhism is all about and how it relates to monasticism and all of that. And one of the things you may have noticed, if you look around the Buddhist world today, there's something they call secular Buddhism. Have you heard about secular Buddhism? It's kind of growing around the world. Have you got that in Singapore as well, or is Singapore more kind of, secular Buddhism? Okay, so anyway, it's becoming quite big around the world in many different places, especially in the United States. You find secular Buddhism. And the idea of secular Buddhism, there's many different ideas to it, but one of the main ideas is to kind of take out the religious component and just leave the kind of the psychology of Buddhism. So take out the kind of the packaging, or the cultural, excesses or whatever, and just leave the core, the essence of what Buddhism is about. That's kind of the idea of secular Buddhism. And of course, what that means, very often, it means taking out a lot of things that actually are essential to the Buddhist teachings, because there are many things in Buddhism that are absolutely core, and without those things, Buddhism doesn't really work anymore, and it's no longer Buddhism. So secular Buddhism, very often, it is the word secular part might be right, but the word Buddhist is often not right at all. They actually lost the whole Buddhist idea, and all they have left is secular. So that would often be a more appropriate term to use, just secular. And secular what exactly? That is the kind of the unclear part about this. And the things that they often want to talk about, straight away, things that are kind of considered kind of controversial in certain circles, things like rebirth. Check that out, because rebirth, don't really need that. Doesn't fit with kind of modern ideas of how the world works. So throw that out. And then there are other things in Buddhism also that obviously are considered ancient superstitions, without really reflecting properly on what is essential or not. You throw all of these things out. And one of the things that they sometimes argue should be thrown out is monasticism itself. Why? Because monasticism is something they argue belonged to ancient Indian culture, maybe to some cultures in the present day, but doesn't really fit with modern society. The idea is that very often we want to enjoy ourselves, we want to have our meditation, but we also want to have all the other fun in the world, the relationships, the entertainment, and all of these kind of things. We want to kind of join the kind of the ancient ideas of cultivating the mind together with the kind of enjoyments that you can get in the modern world. And that kind of seems reasonable, doesn't it? Does it? Wait a minute. Maybe they have a point. Maybe that's true. I mean, why shouldn't we have both? Why should we limit ourselves only to one side of things when we can have both? It doesn't sound unreasonable. So why then do we still have monasticism? Maybe there is something more to this that we haven't really considered properly. And this is often the problem when you have this kind of reform movements. Very often what happens with these reform movements that you end up throwing out the baby here. You lose kind of an essential part of things if you have, okay, get rid of the bathwater for goodness sake, but keep the baby. That's why we had the bath in the first place, So make sure you keep the baby. And this is often the problem with these kind of reform movements. There is a reason why the Buddha laid down monasticism. What's the point of having it unless you actually, why did it lay it down unless there was a point to it? And that, of course, is what this is all about. So the secular movement often end up losing the essence of what this teaching is about. And all you are left with is like a shadow of its former self. So that is one problem. There's a kind of we see in the modern world. Another one that you find very often in traditional societies is that being a monastic is often, it's kind of a strange thing here. It is often considered low status kind of within your family. If you have a family and you have a child who wants to become a monk or a nun, That's the last thing the family wants. Yeah, you want to become a monk? No, you must be nuts. What's crazy? And the better you are, the more kind of academically gifted you are, and the more kind of socially adapted you are, and all of these kind of positive things that are valued in society, the less you want that child to go forth and become a monastic. Yeah, you can go to university, you can have a career, you can make money, you can become a good lawyer, a good doctor, you can do whatever, all of these things. And the last thing they want the child to do is to become a monastic. It's often said that if you have like many children, there's maybe one who's really bright. Yeah, okay, definitely don't become monastic. There's one that kind of intermediate. Okay, you can maybe become a monastic, and then you have a dumb child. Yeah, okay, definitely you can become a monastic, no problem at all. And the sangha will feed you and look after you, and then you'll be fine because of that. But this is misunderstanding what this is all about. Yeah, what we should do instead, if you really understood what this was about, what we should do instead, we should take the most smart one. Yeah, he or she should become the monastic, and the dumb, well, they. Well, okay, they can also become monastic, actually. So, okay, everyone can become a monastic, is no problem. But certainly the smart one, because they actually will be able to live that monastic life to far higher quality, with a much better standard. And for that reason, they will become much more of a blessing, both for themselves and also for the world around them. And this is why it is so useful. But you know what it's like, yeah? I don't know about you. Many of you who are here today, if you told your family that you wanted to become monastic, what would your family say? Would they say, yay, hooray, becoming a monastic, wonderful? Or would they say, hold on a minute, let's see first of all if there are other options first of all, and then maybe you can consider it afterwards. So this is the kind of thing, yeah? It is very often, people don't really want to encourage this, and family members often hold you back, and it's actually quite hard often to become a monastic. And I speak from personal experience. Yeah, because I also, obviously, once before haven't always been a monk. Yeah, I started out as a layperson myself. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, you start off as a layperson and you become a monk after a while. So I also had to persuade my family to kind of allow me to go forth. And when I first started out, I said, I'm considering to become a monk. The first thing my father said, actually not the first thing, he had to think about it a bit first, but then he said, we have failed in our upbringing here. Yeah, and I said, okay, whatever. I didn't know what to say, but and so I know how difficult it is. Yeah, I know what it's like, because it's not just. Sometimes people say, oh, it's in Asian culture, it's very hard because the family units are very strong and it's very hard for parents to let go of their children. All that, but actually, it's true in all cultures. Yeah. More conservative, yeah. But the Western culture is pretty much, it's also the same, because there's always that bond between parents and children. It's always fairly strong. So cultures tend to be much more uniform than sometimes we like across the world. And there may be some slight difference, but they aren't all that great. So I had to kind of, what I had to do, I had to be really stubborn, yeah, and I had to kind of say, oh, I'm going to be a monk, yeah, and so I kind of carried on like this. And of course, through that stubbornness, eventually what happens is that you end up going forth. And not only do you go forth, but because you live your monastic life to a high quality, and that's what I try to do, actually, after a while, it turns your parents around. And that is what is so astonishing to see here. And when that happened, I realized that, well, the reason why most parents are reluctant to allow the children to go forth is because they don't really understand. They don't understand what going forth is all about. They don't really even understand the Buddhist teachings. In a place like, even in Buddhist countries that are much more Buddhist than Singapore is, like Sri Lanka or Thailand, where people have grown up with Buddhism, they've been taught Buddhism since they were could barely walk. Yeah, they go to kindergarten or can teach them Buddhism straight away. They haven't learned anything about Buddhism, right? They go to all these schools and things, but they don't really understand what Buddhism is all about. Instead, often what they understand is all the nice little stories of Buddhism, all the Jataka tales and all those kind of things. That is what they learn, but they don't learn about the essence, what Buddhism is all about. And that is the problem. Otherwise, if they understood the essence of Buddhism, they would encourage you. They would say, please become a monk. Yeah, please become a nun. Don't wait for to get our permission. You have a permission beforehand. The first thing, kind of when you start growing up, they will let you know that it would be really cool to have a daughter or a son who is a monk or a nun. That's what really should happen if they understood truly and fully what Buddhism is about. And this is very often not the case. But I have noticed that sometimes when parents have been coming to a lot of meditation retreats and have been thinking about the Dhamma in the right way, actually there comes a point when sometimes they actually do start to encourage their children in that direction, because they start to understand there's something very profound and very beautiful and very powerful going on with Buddhism. Anyway, so what happened with me was that after a while, after I'd been a monk it took a long time, but after being a monk for about 10 years, my parents started to turn around. Yeah, they came around and they started to come to me and they started to say, let's do some meditation together. Yeah, why not you give us a Dhamma talk? So I found myself sometimes, some of my parents, they took the whole family to like a holiday somewhere, and they invited me as a monk to kind of be the entertainer, perhaps? I'm not sure. You've got to have some entertainment on holidays. Yes, they took me to these really, really nice destinations, and then the whole family would sit down, on the beach somewhere, something like that, in a really nice place. And then we, like 15 of us, everyone basically, and then we would do some meditation together, and we have a Dhamma talk. And everyone was so happy with that. Yeah, it was actually such a positive thing. And towards the end of his life, my father passed away quite recently, but towards the end of his life, he listened, actually, end of the last 4 or 5 years, he listened to my Dhamma talks online. He would kind of get into YouTube or whatever, and he would listen to my Dhamma talks. What's going on? This is not supposed to happen. This is impossible. It doesn't work like that. The father is the teacher. The son is the kind of the student of the father. The father is not the student of the son. But that's actually what happened. And the way these things happen is because after a while, if you live your monastic life well, people see that there's something really profound, something really important going on here that is far more deep, far more profound and useful than anything you can find in the ordinary worldly life. And this is really what this is about. And then things start to turn around, and then things become very different. So what is it? What are these things that are more profound? And I'm going to start off not so much with talking about why be a monastic, but why there is monasticism in general. What is the point of monasticism? And one of the reasons why there is monasticism is, of course, because the Buddha laid it down. But the reality is that without monasticism, there wouldn't be any Buddhism. Buddhism actually relies and depends on monasticism for its very existence. If you took out monasticism out of Buddhism and you had a kind of a secular Buddhism as they are envisaging it in places like the United States, actually the entire Buddhism would collapse as a consequence. And this, you understand, So very important, and this is how important it is. Why is it that important? Why is it so central to Buddhism to actually have monasticism? And the answer to that is that, and this is one of the things that occurred to me, or not occurred to me, but I started to realize when I started to read some of the early suttas of the Buddha, the way the Buddha talked about Buddhism, how it is encouraged to grow in the future and to sustain itself for future generations. This is found very often in places like the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is this Buddha's discourse just before he passed away. And of course, just before he's passing away, what he's doing, he's telling all his disciples what they need to do to encourage and keep Buddhism in the future. And one of the things he said in there, he says that one of the things that will ensure the survival and the growth of Buddhism in the future is if the monastic Sangha enjoys forest dwellings. This is one of 7 factors. The other factors are things like harmony and that sort of thing. But one of the 7 factors that actually makes the whole Sangha or the whole Buddhism survive is that monastics enjoy forest dwellings. And this is, so the idea of living in the forest and withdrawing from society actually is fundamental for the very survival of Buddhism itself. Why is that the case? And the reason why that is the case, and to see that properly, what you have to do is you have to read the word of the Buddha quite broadly. And one of the things that you find in the word of the Buddha is that the ability to develop your meditation properly through the Noble Eightfold Path or the factors of awakening or whatever angle you look at the path from, it is always based on one thing. All meditation is based on one thing, and that one thing is seclusion. Seclusion is one of those fundamental things that make the possibility of developing the Buddhist path all the way to the end is absolutely required for that to actually happen. And when you read some of the important suttas in the Pali Canon, oops, I'm trying to eat the microphone. When you read some of the suttas in the Pali Canon, things like the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing, or the Satipatthana Sutta, and these things, they always start off while you go off to an empty hut. You go off to the root of a tree, or you go off to an empty place. This is where it starts out, and this is actually what is required for these things to be developed properly. If you're going to have success in your mindfulness of breathing, meditation, all of these things, that is what you have to do to have success. So you have to be secluded. You have to withdraw. And only then, when you withdraw from society, and the reason why this is the case, the Buddha talks about two kinds of seclusion. Pali word for seclusion is viveka. First is kaya viveka, which means seclusion of the body. And that means just withdrawing out of society, the ordinary society. Sometimes we don't have to withdraw all that far. We just had a retreat at Batam Island. Okay, it's not full seclusion. It's in a hotel in Batam Island. It's not kind of absolute seclusion, I admit, I have to confess. But it is a little bit of seclusion, because you're coming out of your ordinary family life. You're coming out of your ordinary job, and your surroundings are a bit different. And Batam is quite rural and simple compared to Singapore, let's face it. And that is kind of charming, and then you kind of go there, and it's a little bit of seclusion. The next best is go to more like a forest meditation center like Jhana Grove, which is really kind of much more secluded again. And then the next step after that is find an empty hut for yourself. That is the next step. But to find an empty hut for yourself, not so easy. It's pretty difficult. How many empty huts do you have here in Singapore? Not so many empty huts. Very few empty huts. Unless you are incredibly wealthy, because I know that land in Singapore is so incredibly expensive. If you're super duper wealthy, you can maybe have a little hut on your lawn or something like that. Maybe that's kind of the best you can do sometimes in Singapore. But are there any Buddhists that are so wealthy in Singapore that you can have not many, maybe one or two Buddhists who have that kind of. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. It's good to get sidetracked. It makes the talk more interesting here. So this is what it is. So first of all, you have the kaya viveka, withdraw from society, and that is where the chitta viveka means the seclusion of mind, only becomes possible once you withdraw with the body. First of all, you take your body out of society, out of the ordinary pleasures of the world. And then, as you do that, after a while, your mind also starts to feel as if it is withdrawn from that society. As long as you are physically in society, the mind is also affected by that closeness to society and to people around you. Some of you have been to monasteries before, so you're nodding in agreement. You know a little bit about what I'm talking about. So that is this is how it works, And as long as you are in society, as long as you have all the pleasures of the world, all the people, all the traffic, all the noise, all the things going around you, what is a city? The city is a playground of the five senses. The city is a place where we enjoy ourselves. We get nice cups of coffee at the coffee bars. I just got a nice cup of coffee before. That was very nice, Ivan. So thank you very much for that. So there's some advantages with the city. We have to admit, but it is a place. It's a playground of the senses. A place where you enjoy entertainment, where you go to nice restaurants, where you find a date or a partner in life, and all of these kind of things. That is what happens in the cities. And when you withdraw from all of that, that is when you can allow your mind to calm down and withdraw from these things. And it is interesting, in the suttas, it is always those people who live withdrawn, far away from the world, far away from all of those things. That is where you get the deep meditation. That is where you get the real insights. And it is that ability to meditate deeply, to get the real insight into the nature of reality, that is ultimately what sustains Buddhism in the future. Why is that? Because you can read the suttas, you can read the word of the Buddha, but unless you actually see the suttas as a lived out experience, unless somebody embodies the suttas through their actions, through their speech, through the way they think and through the way they talk, it becomes very theoretical and it becomes very hard to relate to. But when you see somebody who has lived these teachings fully and well, and there are people like that in this world today, people like Ajahn Brahm, for example, people like some of the famous Ajahns, or some of the not so famous Ajahns as well, that you find in Thailand sometimes and other countries. People like that, when you meet them, you feel they have a presence, they have something about them that is different, something ordinary people don't have. And when you kind of feel that, it brings the suttas alive. And then when they give you a teaching about the suttas or about the Buddha, you have a feeling that they are interpreting these teachings in the right way, in a way that they understand what is going on. And you feel a sense of security that you can rely on what is happening here. As soon as we stop realizing these teachings, as soon as nobody really has these insights anymore because we have abandoned monasticism altogether, then the teachings revert to print on a piece of paper or to pixels on a screen. That is all they are at that particular point. They don't come alive anymore. Why? Because we don't see the lived example of what these teachings are about. That lived example is so important. And that lived example, ultimately, you find it in the monastic sangha. You can find it among lay people. There are some lay people who are very, very impressive practitioners who live a life almost like a monastic. But that is the reason why they are successful. Is because they live almost like monastics. So you have to be kind of halfway monastic already anyway. So live by yourself, not really having any, living a very secluded and simple life. And then there is a chance of these things working out. And I have always been very inspired by some of the examples of the monastics that I have seen around the world, that I have met sometimes, and how powerful it is to see that example. And one of my favorite monks, he is, or one of the ones I really know about, who lives a very secluded life. He's a monk who lives in Sri Lanka, and he lives in Sri Lanka, and he lives in the jungle. In Sri Lanka, you have real jungle, It's a bit like some of the jungle you have here in the middle of Singapore, but just everywhere. It goes on for miles, for kilometers, for as far as you can possibly see. And all just wild animals everywhere, elephants, kind of, all of this sort of stuff. And this particular monk, he has lived like that in the jungle for 40 years, about 40 years, And when he lives in the jungle, he has a little hut in the jungle with 3 walls. Not 4, 3 walls, 3 walls. So one wall is missing. Why is that? Because then it is more like being part of the jungle. It's like you are like living in a cave, so that animals can come in whenever they want. Kind of nice. You wake up in the morning, you have animals sleeping next to you. It's cool, isn't it? This is what happens. So Mr. Snake wakes up in the morning together with you, sleeping next to you. And this is how he says it often is, because you're living in a jungle. And the nearest hut, the nearest person living next to him is about 10 kilometers away. So your nearest neighbor is 10 kilometers. It's not like next door, you kind of knock your wall, and then the neighbor can, hey, shut up, don't knock the wall. It's not like that, what can be like in an apartment sometimes. And then he goes in to the village. And the village is where he gets his alms food, so he goes in there, gets his alms food once a day, and maybe the villagers ask him a very simple question, or maybe they just want a blessing or something like that. So he does that, and then he goes back to his kuti. That is all the contact it has with human beings. And then maybe once a year he comes out into society to meet his fellow monks, and then they have a Dhamma discussion. And then they discuss the Dhamma for about a few days, and then he disappears into the jungle again, like some kind of ghost disappearing into the jungle. It's so inspiring. And what is so astonishing, and this is kind of the interesting thing about this, is that when you meet people like that who live all the time in a jungle, in such solitude, they are some of the most happy people you can imagine. And this is what is so astonishing. You think that someone who lives in the jungle all the time, who has no entertainment, who has no relationships, who eats 1 meal a day, and it's not even a nice meal. It's kind of this ordinary rice with a bit of very simple dal on it. Dal, the kind of the food they eat in Sri Lanka and parts of India, but very simple stuff, because these villages are very simple people. And apart from that, you have nothing. You have this kind of robes, and that's all you have. and yet they are so happy, and yet they are so peaceful, and yet they have this ability to understand the Dhamma and discuss the Dhamma that nobody else has. And you realize that there is something in this world that is far more profound, far more useful, an inner happiness, an inner glow that is much more than anyone ever can experience in ordinary life. Yeah, and this is the profundity with meeting people like that. And this is why it is so powerful, because it allows you an insight, an understanding into a different reality, a life which is lived in a different way, but in a far more profound way, giving access to things that ordinary people are not able to access. So this is how you see this, and this is why you start to understand why monasticism is so important and why it is so useful, because that is where you find the causes and conditions that enable you to achieve this kind of extraordinary insight and understanding, and therefore also happiness, contentment, peace, and all of these kind of things on the Buddhist path. And you have other people. You have people like Ajahn Brahm, who goes on a meditation retreat for 6 months. He didn't speak to a single person for 6 months. He didn't even go into the village. He just for 6 months, not talk to anyone. Then after 6 months, when you meet him, I've never seen any person so bright as I saw Ajahn Brahm after those 6 months. I was there in the monastery when this happened. It was like this kind of, it was astonishing, this incredibly power brightness when somebody comes out after 6 months of meditation. And then he gave his first talk not long afterwards, and the title of that first talk was 6 Months of Bliss. And all he had done was stay in a small hut, 7 square meter hut. He had one walking path. He had one book in that hut, the middle-length sayings of the Buddha. And that's all he had for 6 months. He didn't move outside of that area for 6 months. Would you enjoy that? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? For most people, very hard to imagine. But this is kind of the point. It opens up your view to an alternative reality of what actually can be done as a human being here. There's another story. There's another short story I told on the retreat in Batam Island. And this was just also about Ajahn Brahm in the early days. This was at Wat Nanachat, the international forest monastery in Thailand, and he was one of the monks who helped start out Wat Nanachat. And every Uposatha day, on the full moon and the new moon days, they would all come together and they would sit in meditation. And when on the Uposatha, all the villagers would also come to sit in meditation with the monks. So the villagers would come, the monks would come, and the monks would sit on an elevated seat called an asana, and then the lay people would sit all in the middle. And on this particular Uposatha, they were meditating like this. And after a while, because they would meditate for many hours, after a while the room starts to empty out, and after a while all the monks had left except for one monk, and that was Ajahn Brahm. And after a while all the lay people had left except for this one ancient Thai lady. Really, these ancient Thai ladies are the toughest people around. They've always been sitting on the ground their whole life, always sitting with legs crossed, so they can outlast anyone else in terms of sitting, with the legs crossed on the ground. Most of us, we start fidgeting after 20 minutes unless you have some nice cushions or whatever. But she could sit on the concrete floor 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, no problem. So on this particular night, this ancient Thai lady, I'm not sure how ancient she was, but she looked very ancient, and she was watching Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm was sitting on the asana, kind of high up, and she was watching this monk. And she couldn't see any movement. There was nothing going on. There was no sign of breathing. There was nothing at all. And one of the kind of amazing things what happens if there is no breathing, what happens is that the mosquitoes start to get confused. Because the mosquitoes, they home in on you because they feel something is there. But if you are like a rock, if you're like a tree, the mosquito just goes round and round and round. It doesn't know what to do. Is this a human being or is it like, what is it? I've actually seen this happen. It's very strange when this happens. I've sat next to Ajahn Brahm and I think, whoa, that's really weird. And the mosquito doesn't know what's going on. Anyway, that's not the real story. That's a sidetrack again here. So Ajahn Brahm is sitting there completely still. Nothing is going on. And this Thai lady is watching 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. After 3 hours, she gets up. She leaves the room and she goes out. She finds a monk outside and she says to the monk outside, Venerable, there is a monk inside the hall who is dead. And this is what happens, yeah? This is what happens is that when you become that peaceful, when you become so still in a meditation practice, you enter a state which is, from personal subjective experience, it is so blissful that the entire world outside disappears. And when the entire world outside disappears, you become still, like a rock, like a mountain, unshakable, immovable. And when you see things like that, it scares you a little bit, it freaks you out a little bit initially, because you think, whoa, the monk has died. But afterwards you think, actually, maybe there's something more profound going on here. And that is kind of the case. Something more profound is going on. And these are the things that are experienceable through monasticism. This is where you understand the Buddhist teachings. When you understand the Buddhist teachings, then you can pass them on to the next generation reliably, because you have personal experience of what is going on. If you haven't got that, you can't pass it on, and then before you know it, Buddhism is gone. All you have is lots of lay people around doing pujas and doing a bit of meditation together, but it never gets to the heart of what Buddhism is all about. You might as well be a Christian, really. Yeah, it doesn't make much difference. You might as well be an atheist or a free thinker. It's all pretty much the same. Yeah, you chill a bit in meditation and you kind of have a good time, but it doesn't go that deep. I'm being naughty, a little bit naughty, but so that is the first thing, yeah, is that Buddhism as such cannot really survive in the long run without monasticism. And I think people often don't quite get that. They don't get the profundity of these teachings and what they are really about. But more important than that, because Buddhism is there for a reason. There's no point in just having Buddhism because we are kind of sentimental. Oh, we want Buddhism to be around. Yeah, we've been Buddhists for a long time. We don't want to lose Buddhism. That's not really enough. Just for sentimentality and for tradition's sake. We need to, the point of Buddhism is precisely to actually do something to us, to change our life and to actually have a transformative effect. And this is the other reason why monasticism is so powerful. It is so powerful because it is far more meaningful than lay life. Yeah, or maybe I should instead divide it in a different way. I should say the spiritual life is far more meaningful than just an ordinary material life. That's probably a fairer division. But of course, the spiritual life taken all the way to the extreme, where all you do is a spiritual existence, at least ideally that's all you do. It's not always the case. That is really the monastic life. Yeah, so that is why it is so incredible. That is why it is so important. And to understand that, to understand this distinction between the spiritual life and the ordinary worldly life, you have to consider what the worldly life really is about. How it works and how it actually, or how it doesn't work sometimes. Yeah, this is just as important as how it works. And the problem with the worldly life is that all of those things that we seek in the worldly life are so extraordinarily unreliable. They are always going to let us down. They are things that we can never hold on to in the end and actually take along with us. And that is why the worldly existence, the existence that looks out for material pleasures in the world, for status, for all of these things, actually in the end always is going to let us down. And this is what you have to understand. And it's not very difficult to understand this. Yeah, it is in many ways, it's actually blooming obvious that this is going to have to be the case. It's going to have to let us down. And all you have to do is to think about it carefully and reflect on it, especially in line with how the Buddha talks about these things. If you think about the things that you are pursuing in this life, what are the typical things that we are pursuing in this life? Material things. We all know that all the material things, all the things we own in this life are going to have to go one day. Sometimes they go for all kinds of reasons. In Australia, people's houses burn down. Sometimes you have people stealing things from you. At the very latest, you're going to have to let it all go when you die. It's all going to have to go, everything you own. So are you going to spend your entire life building up, putting all your energy and all your effort into things that you have to let go of? Imagine how terrible that is. You come to your deathbed, you spend your entire life building up a nice fortune, all these beautiful things, all the kind of beautiful material things, a nice car, some nice paintings on the wall, beautiful furniture in your house. This is what you spent your whole life doing, building all of this up. And now you're dying. You're going to have to give it up. what does it feel like? It feels painful. Yeah, you feel like you have wasted your time. You've spent so much time, so much effort on things that are ephemeral, that are out of control, that are going to have to go again. And it's not just the material possessions in our life, it is our status. We think about the status that we have, for example, the status of how our relationship to other people, our educational status, all of these things that we measure ourselves by compared to other people. All that status as well is related to this world. It is how we are related to other people that determines our status, who we know, what kind of university we went to, and all of these kind of things. When you die, all of that becomes irrelevant. Why? Because it belongs to this world. It's not something that you can take with you into the future. All of that has to go as well. And then you have all your relationships, all your family members, all your friends, all your acquaintances. If all you do in life is build up as many friends as you possibly can, and all you do is attach to your family members to the maximum, then when you die, it's going to be very difficult again. And very often that difficulty comes even before you die. Why? Because often people divorce us, they die, they get sick. This happens all the time. Open the newspaper any day of the week, at any time, there are always people dying, people having problems all the time. All of these things have to go. And of course, ultimately, our own physical body has to go as well. You're going to have to say goodbye to the physical body. And so the question then becomes, if all of these things are so ephemeral, if they all are so unreliable and so uncertain, we know they're going to have to disappear at the very latest when we die, very often long before that, then how much effort, how much energy, how much of your self are you going to put into these things that are so ephemeral and uncertain? And then come to your deathbed, and then you look back on your life and you have put everything into these things, and now everything has to go. You're going to feel bad. You're going to feel confused. You're going to feel, what was the point of this existence? I've done all of this, and now it all has to go again. It seems completely idiotic, and then go, and then nothing. And that is the problem with the worldly life. The worldly life doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't make you build up anything useful. All it does is lead to suffering in the future, because in the meantime, as you build all of these things up, not only do you build them up, but you attach to them as well. And because you attach to them, when that attachment gets challenged, and sooner or later it will get challenged, you're going to suffer as a consequence. It's terrible, isn't it? Is there a better way, perhaps? How can we just be so silly? It is so incredibly obvious when you think about it. I think everybody can relate to this. Is there anyone here who cannot relate to this? Who thinks I'm talking complete gibberish and nonsense? Everyone understands, Everyone has some idea that there is some truth to this, because actually it is bleeding obvious that there's some truth to this. And so what is the alternative? And what is that we have to do? And this is where the movement from the worldly life to the spiritual life actually starts to become meaningful. And if you take that movement from the worldly life to the spiritual life to its extreme all the way, it means that you are moving towards monasticism, and why you should be a monastic. So the other side of things is then to build up things that last, things that you don't have to give up when you die, things that you actually can own beyond death. And of course, from a Buddhist point of view, there's only one thing that we own in this world. Only one simple thing, and that is our karma. And our karma is basically the actions, how we live our life, whether you live with kindness, whether you live with generosity and compassion and understanding and peace and all of these things in the world with wisdom. And if you live in this way consistently throughout your life, you're lifting yourself up. You're gradually becoming a better person. You feel inside of you that there is a change taking place. You're becoming brighter, lighter, and a more contented person in this world. You can feel the change. If you can't feel the change, it means you're not really practicing the spiritual path to its full potential. This is what is worth doing, because this is what, when you die, you think, wow, I have changed my life in a fundamental way that goes to the very core of who I am as a being. Actually, it doesn't go to the very core, because there is no core ultimately, but it kind of goes towards things that are more permanent, things that are more reliable, and that you can take with you into the future. And the more you get this distinction of this mind that you purify and you build up, of this mind that you make lighter and brighter and more wise, for taking that with you into the future, the more clarity you have about that, the more you move towards a spiritual life, and the less interested you become in the worldly life. So many of you are already getting this, yeah? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You're already getting the idea that the spiritual life has a degree of value. And that's why you come to these kind of talks, that's why you come to the Buddhist fellowship, that's why you have an interest in these things. I don't know, maybe I go too far, maybe you can never come back again after today, but you're still here, so hold on a little bit longer, yeah? See if I can get the message across clearly here. So you already have got the message a little bit, so you're already heading in that direction. You understand why it is important to have a spiritual component in your life. The more you understand it, the more you go in that direction, eventually it leads only to one place, and that is to becoming a monastic. Because it is a monastic when you focus 100% on the spiritual qualities, because you realize that actually all of this other stuff actually doesn't take you anywhere. It doesn't lead you anywhere. It's just a dead end, and in the end it's going to be troublesome, unsatisfactory, and it's going to let you down. So this is why monasticism is so powerful, because it takes this whole thing all the way to the highest potential, and then you can make a change that is really life-changing, and really makes life completely different from what it is ordinarily. It was interesting, one of my fellow monks before I left Bodhinyana Monastery, he said to me that, one of the differences between monasticism and lay life is that in lay life, the way you measure yourself against other people is always about how wealthy you are, or about how kind of popular you are, or about how, all of these things that we measure ourselves with in lay life. But from a monastic point of view, all of these things, they look exactly the same. Yeah, whether you are wealthy or popular or famous or successful in business, all that is kind of irrelevant. The unsuccessful person versus the successful one looks exactly the same from a monastic point of view. Why? Because you are attaching to the same things. Your values are in the same place. Your values are still in those worldly things that are ephemeral and unreliable. So the same kind of suffering is going to come to you down the track. And the same kind of emptiness is going to come to you when eventually you have to die feeling you haven't used your life for anything useful. Yeah, so for monastics, everyone looks the same. Yeah, all ordinary people look the same. You kind of don't make that much difference between them. Well, I'm exaggerating a bit as usual, but roughly, yeah, there is a lot of similarity there. And the difference, really, from a monastic point of view, is that the monastic life versus the lay life really is where the big kind of difference is. So this is one of the powerful reasons for monasticism and for living the spiritual life in general. If you cannot be a monastic, you can still live the spiritual life well. So this is one way of looking at this. Another way of looking at this is to look at what are the real goals in life. Yeah, one of the things that is interesting, one of the kind of beautiful teachings I learned about Ajahn Brahm in the very early days was the idea of always look beyond the obvious, look beyond the ordinary goals that we have. Yeah, what are the goals we have in life? Well, sometimes if you are at university, yeah, your goal is to pass your exams. Yeah, that's kind of exams. Well, this is the big thing here. And the strange thing is that when you look at that goal, when you look towards those exams, it's as if they fill your entire existence. Yeah, that becomes everything there is. You look towards those exams and they become like, it's almost as if existence ends at that point. You don't tend to think beyond that because they take up your entire mental landscape because you consider them so important. And if you look at that carefully, you will see that there is a great amount of delusion in that. There is the feeling that this is really important. There's a feeling that this will somehow change your life. There's a feeling that this will kind of give some kind of satisfaction and contentment. So you work really hard to that, but you don't really see beyond it. Yeah, you know what I mean? When you have a goal, something you're moving towards, it's as if life stops at that goal. Of course, it doesn't really stop there, but it stops in terms of you don't have a vision very often beyond that. Or it may be a project at work, yeah, something important that you have been working on for a long time, and you kind of see that as the goal, and you don't see beyond that. It may be a romantic relationship. Yeah, you're trying to get into a relationship with somebody and you work really hard for it and you have this dream, this idea of what it's going to be like and you work towards that goal, but you never think beyond. especially with romantic relationships, because beyond, it is not so interesting. It is kind of all the hard work to get there, and then finally getting together. But then what? We forget the then what. And this is the kind of the point about all of this, is that very often we are deluded by the ordinary goals in life. It's as if our future stops at that particular point. But instead of thinking like that, we should always think, and then what? And when you think, and then what, it breaks the delusion that these goals actually really are worthwhile. So if you think about a romantic relationship, if you think just to the point where you finally get together and maybe you get married or whatever, that kind of becomes the goal of whatever you're doing. If you start to think too much about the then what afterwards, it breaks that interest in that relationship, at least to some extent. Because the then what after the relationship, what is that? Well, the then what after that is ordinary life. Yeah, it means coming back home, living together, having to do the dishes, having to argue sometimes, yeah, all of these things. That's the then what, the kind of the love and the romantic thing only is kind of happens rarely. Yeah, it's something that happens maybe initially more often, and the longer that relationship goes on for, the more you take each other for granted, and the more ordinary it is. You start off having a really romantic relationship. After a while, you're just friends. And at the end of life, you're like each other's nurses nursing each other. That's the reality. Yeah, this is how it goes. And in the meantime, very often you get divorced. Yeah, somebody told me today that one out of 3 couples in Singapore get divorced these days. So the chances of you getting divorced, pretty good. Yeah, if you get married, pretty high. Of course, we all tend to think that we are different from everyone else, so we are not going to get divorced, but that is delusion, yeah? This is actually just also completely wrong, and it doesn't work out that way. I also always thought I was much smarter than I was young, and I looked at my parents and my brother and sister, and I've looked at their relationships, and my parents actually had a fairly good relationship, and they were married for 60 years until my father died. And then I look at my sister and my brother, and how kind of everything is really messed up, and I thought they were quite wise people. Yeah, they were surely as wise as me. Well, maybe wiser, I don't know. But somehow they weren't able to make it work out. I don't know why. It's just the nature of things. Yeah, it's just the way things are. It doesn't work out. And this is what you have to remember. We always have to remember the and then what? What happens afterwards? Eventually you get divorced. Eventually you have to die. Yeah, eventually one of you have to die. What if you do find the perfect person and you have one of those really nice relationships? Some people get on really, really well in life. And what happens then? You have to die. And it is so hard when you have a really good relationship and then somebody dies from you. You always lose out. Yeah, it doesn't matter what happens. It's always going to be, it's always a kind of a bad ending in these things. It always lets you down in the end. And the whole of life is like that. So when you think about the future, never stop at those goals that you have. Always think beyond those goals. And then what? Yeah, when the hero rides into the sunset at the end of the cowboy movie, you should always ask, and then what? Because after the sun goes down, it gets dark, and then you have to go back home. And when the hero rides away, and maybe he has been fighting all the Indians or whatever, there are more Indians over the horizon. Yeah, the fighting doesn't stop at that particular point. And then maybe you have to go home, and you go back to home, and you meet your wife, yeah, and then you kind of go back to the ordinary domestic arguments. I don't know what happens afterwards, but it's never the same afterwards. Or the prince and the princess, they finally get married, yeah, and they go back, and then they have all the kind of problems of the prince and prince life, which of course are really bad, yeah. Everybody thinks that living as a prince or a princess is great. It's just like any other life. I have known some very wealthy people in my life. They have life just like everyone else. It's no different. I remember not so long ago, I was staying in the house of this incredibly wealthy person. And then every day for breakfast, he would invite me down. Yeah, so I could have breakfast with him and his wife, and of course all the maids kind of running around and doing all this kind of stuff. And then he would tell me about his family life and all the headaches he had, yeah, about how his children weren't behaving properly and how they were kind of not being Buddhist, they were becoming Christians. And I thought, this is worse than most ordinary people have it. Yeah, it's terrible. And then I would see him in the evening, and he would sit down, because I was kind of way up, and I could see him way down the bottom. There's a big house. And I saw him sitting down the bottom on this big sofa, all by himself, yeah, in this enormous house, this big mansion. And he's sitting there with his mobile phone, playing around with his mobile phone. And it looked so lonely. I thought, what's the point of all this money? What's the point of all this stuff? You look just as lonely, you look more lonely than most other people because you are fenced into this big mansion. You are afraid of the world outside because when you're wealthy, you think other people are going to take advantage of you. So you are afraid of other people outside and you become even more lonely because of that. This is the good thing about being poor. Yeah, I'm really, really poor. I have lots of friends because of that. So that's why all of you come here, because it is kind of nice in that sense. So all of these things are problematic, and all of these things don't really work out. The and then what is so useful to remember. It's actually what is also interesting about this is that very often I started off by saying something about Buddhism not always being all that adequate to its purpose. Buddhism is so much. Buddhism goes all the way back to the Buddha, and it's also the history of all the development of Buddhism over 2,500 years. All of that is Buddhism. So it's incredibly broad, and some of that is not really Buddhism. It's Buddhism in name only, but it's not actually real Buddhism. We have to distinguish between Dhamma on the one hand, which is the teaching of the Buddha, and then Buddhism on the other hand, which is all this other stuff that also is kind of added to the early teachings of the Buddha. And this can make a massive difference. And one of the times this really became clear to me when I was reading, been translating some of the Pali into English. And this is from the Vinaya Pitaka, which is all the monastic discipline, all the monastic rules and all that kind of stuff. And in this monastic discipline, there's not just rules, but there's also stories occasionally. And there was this one story, this one story about the prince who kind of loses his kingdom and his parents gets put into jail and his parents get executed and the neighboring king takes his whole country away from him. It's kind of a really tragic story. But then he's really smart and he kind of makes his way back into the court of this king and eventually ends up with him marrying the daughter of the king, prince and princess married together, and then they get given the kingdom that he originally had, but that he lost before, and then they walk off, and they walk off. It's a bit like riding into the sunset, and they ride off into the sunset, and then the story stops. And I thought, this is not Buddhism. This is like seeing a Hollywood movie, This is crazy. Life isn't like that. It doesn't kind of end in that way. At least if it was a French movie. I don't know if French movies tend to be really end in a really sad way. Everyone dies and everyone is depressed. End of movie. That's kind of the French movies. The French are much better at making realistic movies. But Hollywood movies are the worst. And this was like a Hollywood movie right there in the Buddhist scriptures. I was horrified when I saw that. I thought, and this is a serious problem, and this is why, as I started off, a lot of Buddhists in the world who have grown up in Buddhist countries, they have no idea about the Buddhist teachings. Why? Because they've grown up on stories like that. They've grown up on fairy tales, got nothing to do with the real Dhamma. So again, think about and then what? And when you think and then what you do is you puncture the illusion, you puncture the dream, you puncture the delusion that there is some real goal in life. Actually, after that exam from school, life carries on. Then what? Maybe another exam, or maybe you get a job, and a job happens to be very stressful and very problematic, And then it goes on like that. And after the marriage, again, I already said what happens after marriage, and some of you laughed, so you probably have some experience with that. And all of these things, it carries on. And when you carry it on, when you ask, and then what? It punctures that illusion, that dream, that actually there is some real goal going on. There is no real goal. And when eventually you die, you're still trying to move towards that goal that you never could find in real life. And the reason you couldn't find that goal is because what you were really searching for was some kind of satisfaction, some kind of contentment, something that filled you up inside and actually gave life a real meaning. That is the purpose of all the desire and craving, is to get us to something that makes us feel happy. A final solution to all of the things of the world. And it can never be found in that dream world. All those things that we are pursuing in ordinary life, it can never be found there. And so the Buddha actually specifically says that life is like a dream. Yeah? Or the sensual world, rather, is like a dream. It's as if you have this idea of where you're going, and that idea never bears fruit in the way that you think it will. It never fills you up. It never satisfies you. It never makes you complete. It never ends that itch inside of us that is always moving us on, driving us forward, driven by craving, slaves to craving, as the Buddha says in the suttas, always moving somewhere else, never finding that satisfaction, always thinking the dream is real, when the dream actually is just an illusion. And so snap out of that dream. And the moment you snap out of that dream, you realize that all the goals that we are pursuing in the ordinary life, they're actually empty. There is nothing there. They're not real goals. They are fake goals. And they never take you to where you actually really want to go inside, which is that real satisfaction. And once you get that, once you see that actually we're just messing around in life, not really going anywhere, you start to turn your direction. You start to look somewhere else for satisfaction. And that is where you start to move, perhaps even towards monastic life. And what happens when you do this, when you start to live according to spiritual principles in the right way, when you start to focus on the kindness in life, when you start to focus on meditation practice, what you're doing is you're building up the inner happiness instead. One of the reasons why the ordinary world can never give you that satisfaction and inner happiness that you're searching for, the reason is because it is a psychological problem that we have. It's an inner lack of contentment. And that inner lack of contentment can never really be fully satisfied by external phenomena. Even relationships will only last so long, and then that meaning will actually start to wear out. It won't have the same power of you anymore. So what you have to do instead is you have to develop the mind directly. And that direct development of the mind, instead of trying to satisfy the mind through external things, happens through the spiritual life. First of all, by being kind, by being compassionate, by being understanding, by being generous towards other people. Every time you are kind and compassionate in the right way, you feel good about yourself. That's my experience. Is that your experience? Yeah, you feel good when you are kind. It is natural to feel good about yourself when you're kind. And that goodness, if you notice the quality of that goodness you feel about yourself, it is a goodness that is largely free of that craving, largely free of that itch inside that always drives you somewhere else. That is the spiritual happiness. It is of an entirely different quality than the worldly happiness, which you just attach to and always lead to more craving in the future. This leads to a general reduction in craving. And then you build it up. And you build it up through being kind, through living well, through following the precepts, through understanding how to live a good life. You start meditating. And then, when all of these things come together, your meditation starts to work. And one day, as your meditation works, craving goes down, the contentment, the joy, and the happiness go up. The more all of these qualities go up, the less craving there is, the more you feel that you're touching the meaning of life itself. And this is ultimately why monasticism works. Because monasticism, not really monasticism, but the spiritual Buddhist path, is the answer to the meaning of life. And that path is practiced to the highest possibility when monastic life is lived well. So you're actually coming to the very meaning of life. And this to me is just one of those astonishing things. It is so astonishing because the meaning of life is something that philosophers around the world in almost all cultures have been debating for millennia. Actually, probably for eons, probably. We just don't know about it because the books are all gone a long time ago. But probably if you could get a book from the last universe, probably debating the meaning of life, What's the meaning of life? Don't get it. It's too hard to understand. Meaning of life. Okay, put it to one side. We'll just focus on sensual pleasures instead. Meaning of life too difficult. And then comes the Buddha along, and he actually discovers the answer to this question that nobody else, the smartest people in the world, all the other spiritual seekers, never have really found an answer to. And there it is. If you read the suttas, you read the word of the Buddha in the right way, the answer is right there. This is where it is all heading, to the very meaning of life itself. And once you get that, you start to understand why monastic life is so important, because it has the ability to lead you to the very meaning of existence itself. It is the most meaningful way of living your life, and eventually it also gives you that result as well. Oh, I'm talking too much. So this is what it is about, and this is why monasticism is such an extraordinary thing. It gives you access to all of these things. It is very hard to get access to all of this meaning. It is very hard to get access to the deep meditation when you live in a large city, or even if you just live with a family, even if it's just a farm or whatever. You need that seclusion. You need to withdraw. Only then does it happen. If you want access to the real meaning of life, the real place to go is actually to become a monastic. That is where you find that. And on top of that, this may all sound very selfish, yeah? So if you are a Mahayana Buddhist, you might condemn me as a typical selfish Theravada Hinayana Buddhist, yeah? Oh, I knew all about it all along, now you have proved the point, you're just selfish. But no, the answer is no, it's too simple, it's not really like that. Because one of the other beautiful things about the monastic life is that you also have a tremendous opportunity to help other people. Yeah, and this is the other thing which makes monastic life so beautiful. If I didn't wear these robes, if I didn't have a haircut like this, would you be coming here today? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. It is not as obvious that you would be here. Generally speaking, if you are a monastic, more people listen to you. More people are interested in what you have to say. It is more difficult to have the same status as a teacher if you are a layperson. You gain a certain authority, especially if you live the monastic life well. People are interested because they realize there's something going on there. So you have far more ability to help others as well. And these are the two things that really make life meaningful. Your own development and your ability to help others to reach the same kind of development. And both of those are by far maximized as a monastic. You can reach out to so many people, and you can also discover the very meaning of life itself in your own life. Okay, any candidates from have I succeeded? So okay, I'm gonna stop there. So if you want to ask any questions, it doesn't have to be that particular question, but you can ask any questions you like. Please feel free to do so. Have I said anything as even remotely sensible, or have I? Is it kind of all? Is everyone completely happy? Gee, that's really good, huh? Yes, there's one lady down there. Yeah.
Right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear my question?
I can hear your question. Yeah. So you want to know how do you advise a nun to use forest dwellings, and what is the status of ordination for nuns these days? Yeah.
Yes, right.
So the answer to that is that the status for nuns' ordination is getting better all the time. Yeah, it's actually now it's possible to be a bhikkhuni in many places around the world. You can be a bhikkhuni in many of the traditional Theravadan countries. If you go to Thailand, for example, there's a big growing bhikkhuni sangha in Thailand. There's probably over 200 bhikkhunis now in Thailand. So in Thailand it is becoming possible. I have visited some of those monasteries in Thailand, some of them in very beautiful rural settings, which are great for meditation practice, but they're not so rural that they are kind of illegal from a kind of bhikkhuni point of view, it's too far away in the forest or anything like that. But the setting is still very, very suitable for meditation practice.
But I understand that in Thailand, the bhikkhunis are not even recognized as well by the government or even by the order in Southeast Asia. Isn't that correct?
It is true that they're not recognized by the government, but sometimes that's a blessing. Yeah, once you're recognized by the government, then the government starts to limit you, they start to control you, they start to kind of put you into the hierarchy. Sometimes actually being on your own. It's like in Australia. We are in Australia now, and we're not really recognized by the government. Yeah, there's no kind of, the government doesn't really think about religion. We're just completely separate, really, from society. And that's actually very nice, because we are independent and you can look after your own affairs. The more you fit into a hierarchy, the more also controlled you are by that hierarchy. And this is part of the problems. This is one of the reasons why we weren't so popular after we ordained bhikkhunis in Australia, precisely because we belonged to a hierarchy in Thailand, and they didn't like that, and so they kind of, they kind of took us out of that hierarchy or whatever. So it's becoming better. It is still much more difficult in the world to become ordained as a bhikkhuni than as a bhikkhu. Generally speaking, it's easier to be a man than a woman as a monastic. And that is unfortunate, but slowly, it's becoming better all the time. Yeah. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, monasticism, whatever, what I would recommend you to do, travel around to a few different monasteries. Yeah. If you wish, come down to Australia, have a look at the Dhammasara monastery. There are some other monasteries as well. Travel to Thailand, maybe check out Sri Lanka has some really good monasteries, and see what is available and see if any of that kind of inspires you. If none of that inspires you, you can still practice as a layperson sometimes. Yeah, you have to. It's important to feel inspired and to feel things are right for you. Sometimes if you do things that are too idealistic, it can also backfire. So you have to find that balance with things. But things are getting better and more recognized in the world, and I would recommend it. I mean, there is always a reason why the Buddha lays down the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni ordination, and the reason is because it is the ideal situation in which to practice the monastic or the spiritual path. Okay, nuns and forest dwellings. The answer to that is that it is the definition of a forest dwelling is quite flexible, and there's many different definitions. One of the standard definitions is that it has to be less than 1 kilometer away from the nearest dwelling. Yeah, so you can imagine if you are 1 kilometer away and it's already a rural setting, and you're 1 kilometer away from the nearest dwelling, it still can be very secluded and very forested. So if you go to a place like Dhammasara monastery, for example, when you are in that monastery, you have a feeling that you are completely by yourself in the forest, basically, because there are farms around, but the area, Dhammasara monastery is about 600 acres. Yeah, it's really a lot. This is Australia. There's a lot of land in Australia. So this is, they wouldn't work in Singapore, but in Australia it's possible. So there I would say that is just as good, maybe even better than Bodhinyana Monastery in terms of seclusion. Very nice and secluded here. So this is not as limiting as it may sound, because the definitions of these terms is actually quite flexible here. Yeah. Okay, over here. Yeah. Yeah. The Garudamas. Okay, yeah, please. Yeah.
So I was wondering whether this is actually a later addition, because 8 hard rules are really sort of go out from the act.
Yeah.
So what do you comment on this?
Okay, yeah, the 8 Garudamas, yeah. It is possible that they are a later addition. It is one of those controversial subjects. Nobody really knows exactly when they were laid down. Some people have argued they're later. Some people have argued that they are fairly original, that they may go back a long way. But the main point about the Garudama, this is kind of my take on these Garudamas, is that they are actually not important rules. The reason why they're taken to be important is because of the name. The name Garu, Dhamma, Garu means like heavy or important, and Dhamma means principle. So it seems to be from the name that it is a heavy or important rule. But actually, they're not really important rules at all. And the way to see that is to see how those rules occur in other places in the Vinaya. And in other places in the Vinaya, the Garudammas, they are always either they have no offense at all connected with them, or if there is a offense connected with them, it's a pachitya offense. And pachitya is a low-grade offense, yeah? It's not a big problem here. So these rules that are called the Garu Dhammas, they are actually, instead of being important rules, they're actually more like customary rules that were used in India at that time. If you look at some of the other customary rules that are used, that you find in the Vinaya, these are called the Sakya rules in the Vinaya. In those Sakya rules, it specifically says that it is only an offense to break that rule if you do it out of disrespect. So if you have a good reason for not keeping those rules, then it is actually quite okay not to keep them, because you're not keeping them out of disrespect. I will give you an example, just to give you some idea what is going on here. So for example, in the Sakya rules, it says that you are not allowed to give a Dhamma talk while standing up, if the listener is sitting down. Yeah, because this is considered disrespectful in ancient Indian society. If the other person is sitting and you are standing, it is kind of the wrong feeling, because one position is more relaxed than the other one or whatever. But in a modern setting, if you go to a university, for example, to a lecture hall, the lecturer is always standing and the students are sitting down. So it's not in that case, it's not disrespectful to sit down. In fact, probably would be disrespectful to stand up. Yeah, if you stand up and walk around or something, probably be more disrespectful. So in that case, you say, well, this rule doesn't really apply anymore, and because it doesn't apply, you are actually allowed, from a Vinaya point of view, not to follow that kind of rule. It's only wrong if you don't keep it out of disrespect. And this is true for all of these minor rules that don't actually have are not specifically mentioned outside or in the Patimokkha or whatever. All these minor rules are of that kind of category. They are traditional rules in Buddhism, or traditional rules in that ancient society. If you have a good reason for not keeping them, you don't actually have to keep them. Yeah, this is how I understand these rules, because they are just minor things of etiquette and that sort of thing. I think they keep them. Yes, I tell them. I tell them always no need to keep them, but I think they insist on keeping them. So I think they're still keeping them. Yeah, but the thing is that these rules, they are first of all, you have the 8 Garu Dhammas. Some of them are also found in the Patimokkha rules. Yeah, and if they are found in the Patimokkha, well, then you should really keep them, because they are part of the of the early rules. But some of them are not found in the Patimokkha, and they are rules that are more customary and more to do with how things were done in India in the ancient times. So the nuns at Dhammasara monastery, I think they want to be super duper, do everything in the right way, so they keep these rules. But if they were to, I don't actually tell them very much. But if they ask me, I would say no need to keep them, because the problem is that in a modern society, I don't know what it is like here in Singapore, but in a society like Australian society, for example, if you have too much difference between the genders in terms of how we deal with each other, it makes it very difficult, and it's looked down upon as improper and unfair and all of these kind of things. So what we should do as monastic, we should keep those rules that we definitely should keep, because the Buddha laid them down. But those rules where the Buddha allows us flexibility, we should make sure that we actually use that flexibility so we can have a Buddhism that actually works in the society that you're in. We shouldn't keep rules for rules' sake. We should be smart and intelligent about how we keep rules. So if the Buddha gives us exemptions, we should use those exemptions when valid.
Sariputta was concerned that the sasana would not last long because of the famine, and the Buddha told him then, as long as there are many, many rules, the sasana will last long. Then Sariputta then pleaded for Buddha to give more rules, but the Buddha said it doesn't work like that. Yeah. That only when conditions arise, then the rules are laid down. Yeah. Then if you look at the 8 heart rules, then those conditions did not arise, but they were given. Yeah. So it really sort of difficult to accept the 8 heart rules as given by the Buddha, because it's not the nature of the Buddha to do in that manner.
It's a good point. It's a very good point. That's exactly true. That's all the rules were given only when there was a problem in the Sangha. These are the only rules that were established before there was any problem. They were just established as a kind of almost like a prerequisite for the arising of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So there is an argument there. I think and I don't know what the answer is, whether when these rules arose, it's very hard to kind of come to a satisfactory conclusion. And some of the best scholars in the field have come to opposite conclusions. And some of the best scholars are not like women haters, anything like that. Yes, they want to kind of keep the women down. Some of them are very pro bhikkhunis, but still they have come to different conclusions. So I don't know, but to me, anyway, regardless of that, I am the opinion that nuns do not have to keep these rules. As far as I can see, there's no need at all. But I have a different approach to why that is the case, and not just me, but many others would also agree with that particular approach that I'm just mentioned to you before. But you're quite right. There's definitely an argument to be had there. Yeah.
So the fourfold assembly that the Buddha advocated, that he said that should be there, then there shouldn't be any objection from any of the Sangha, monastic, bhikkhu order. So I think then if they can see that, then there shouldn't be a problem with bhikkhuni order.
There should what shouldn't be and what actually is often different, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I have been pro the ordination of nuns for a long time, and I think it is an important thing, and I think it's absolutely required and necessary, and I'm very much in favor of it myself. And it's just that, we tend to be conservative. Human beings are conservative. We don't like too much change. Bye-bye, Sneha. And because of that, we tend to hold on to our traditions. So in places like Thailand is an old Theravadan Buddhist society, and they have used to a certain way of doing things. And change is always very hard. Anicca is always very difficult. And for that reason, it tends to be conservative and hard to turn around, especially the hierarchies, like the Thai Sangha hierarchy, very conservative. Maybe eventually they will come around, but I think the way that they will come around is not by changing it at the top. The way they will come around is the grassroots grow, the bhikkhuni order grows until they are part of society, and then, they might as well change, because this already happened. It's not going to be a top-down change, it's going to be a bottom-up change. It's going to come from the push from the bottom, from ordinary people supporting bhikkhunis, and the bhikkhuni becoming a de facto sangha, and then the change will come eventually like that.
Is the problem also because the oral tradition was there, and only when it was like the Vinaya was written down in the 1st century, that it was said then it had been such a long time till it was written down. So could it be a later sort of insertion?
Could be, yeah. It's unlikely because it exists. The thing is that there are many different versions of the Vinaya. The Pali is only one. There is 6 versions in Chinese ancient Chinese translation, and all of those various versions have the Garu Dhamma inside. So it's there everywhere. So it actually goes back to a very long time. And these various schools that arose, that actually eventually gave rise to all of these various versions, they arose around the time of Ashoka, which is a long time before Buddhism went to Sri Lanka and all of that. So it is very ancient. I think the Gardhamas are very ancient. Whether they go all the way back to the Buddha or not, uncertain. But it certainly was. It would have happened in India, probably pre-Ashokan times. So it's a long, long time ago. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn. I'm in total agreement with whatever you have said just now. But there's one part, maybe it's a wrong view, please correct. Because you mentioned about seclusion, you're able to reach your deep meditation and insights. Yeah. I find that it is when you're in seclusion or even monastic, but it could be a wrong view, it is a conceptual understanding. I need my awful samsaric world with nasty people to help me to realize those values. So, therefore, a lived experience for realization. Therefore, if I do meet, because I can't really quite handle it right now, but for nasty people, then you can test my depth of my compassion. That could I actually love this person? Yeah. So that's Is there a question in whatever I said? Yeah. So I need my samsaric for the lived experience to realize all those good things about the Dhamma, which I feel wonderful right now listening to you. But I'm constantly tested when I'm going outside.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Too much testing, yeah, and that's kind of the problem with this. Remember, the hard part is to overcome your defilements of the mind. And whenever you're tested, the defilements come back, and then you're right, you get tested, but it's too much, and because it's too much, you can't actually overcome those defilements. That's the problem. So I've heard this argument many times. People say, "Oh, it's much better to be in ordinary life because then you get tested all the time." But actually, too much testing, not enough getting away from the test. There comes a point when you understand enough about the problem, and now all you have to do is to overcome it. And that is that point when you go into seclusion. And then you can really reduce those defilements all the way down completely, and then you can have a state of samadhi or insight that actually overcomes the problem completely. Because the way to overcome the problem is not always to test yourself and just gradually chip away at it. The way to overcome the problem is actually through insight. And insight can only happen with samadhi, and samadhi can only happen in seclusion. The other thing, what you do in daily life, is just kind of chipping away at something which is an endless mountain. And every time new people come into the picture, the mountain increases. Yeah? So you're chipping away at the mountain that is expanding at the same time. You're not getting anywhere. Yeah? It's just that's nice, quite a nice simile, actually. So not from the suttas, but for that reason, there comes a point when you have to withdraw, and you actually have to do the practice in a deeper way. That's really what it is about at the end of the day. Yeah.
Okay, then if not, it's an extension. Then therefore, most of us will not be able to go into monastic. I think it belongs to a group with very good karma. So, so for the most of us, which doesn't have this calling. Yeah. So what do I do? As in, like,
you make the calling. You create the calling. The reason you don't have the calling is because you don't really have full right view yet. The more right view you have, the calling comes by itself. That's the problem. So all you have to do is contemplate these teachings enough, and then the calling arises. This is kind of the point. There's no such thing as having enough good karma. That's kind of completely irrelevant. You create the karma as you go along. If it isn't there, it will happen, and it will come. So that is all kind of irrelevant. So what you have to do, the biggest problem is doubt, I think. If you really knew what was going on, if you had a full understanding of life and of the sensuality and of rebirth and all of these kind of things, and you really saw what was going on, once doubt is gone, then it's so easy to make that jump and to become a monastic. The problem is that we have doubt, and the doubt is holding us back. So we can see part of it, but we can't see enough of the picture to make the commitment to monastic life. And that's a good point. I think that's an important point to bear in mind. You shouldn't just jump into monastic life if you still have lots of doubts, because you won't be able to sustain it. It won't actually work. So it should happen fairly naturally. So you keep on reflecting on it. Keep on allowing this view to grow until the point comes where you actually want to become a monastic. That is always the right time. Maybe not want 100%, because if you wait till you want 100%, it's never going to happen also, but at least you have to reach a certain percentage, 70% or something. Try it out. Even now, try it out sometimes. Come and stay in our monastery for a few weeks. Maybe you'll hate it, who knows? But you might enjoy it, who knows what's going to happen? And then gradually you learn a different view of these things. You start to see things in a different way. But it is, so yes. Anyway.
Ajahn Brahmali.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it in today's world? Is it impossible to achieve enlightenment without being a monastic?
So it's to say it is impossible. It's a very hard bar to clear, yeah, to say something is impossible, because impossible, something may be possible, but still basically impossible. So, I mean, something may be possible, but basically impossible. If you know what I mean, it may be possible in theory, but in practice, it is roughly almost impossible. And that is what matters. So it's not so much about whether it actually is impossible or not, given certain conditions, maybe, given certain extraordinary conditions, someone might actually break through as a layperson. And perhaps there are lay people today who have these insights. Perhaps there are lay people today, who live maybe a simple life, maybe in a hut somewhere in Thailand or far away in the forest or whatever, and all they do is meditate, and they have good meditation, all of these kind of things. And maybe they are able to make that breakthrough. But how realistic it is a very, very different thing. One of the great things about monasticism is that it gives incredibly good support for the spiritual life, yeah? And this is what is so good about it. If you live in a good monastery where you feel inspired, you have good teachers, and you have all the right things, where you feel at ease and you feel relaxed and you feel happy in that monastic life, then it actually gives incredible support. You have a little kuti in the forest, you have lay people who come and support you and kind of offer you food today. You should have seen the banquet that I was eating today at the mealtime. No lay people eats like that. I was just it was like, whoa, 2 tables full of food and very delicious food as well. So you get this extraordinary support, yeah, and that is such a beautiful thing. And of course, the reason why you get that support is because of the Buddha. The Buddha started this out 2,500 years ago, and he now enables us to live off what he created 2,500 years ago. And you also can be part of that, yeah. You can also live off that merit of the Buddha, what the Buddha did 2,500 years ago. It's very touching. You just stay at Bodhinyana Monastery, and every day between 30 and 100 people come to the monastery just to offer you food. It's a miracle, yeah, that these things happen. It's like you can't barely believe it. Every day people come and support you in that way. It's such a beautiful thing. It's such an uplifting thing. And then you go back to your kuti. When I go back to my kuti, there is nothing else that I can see anywhere around me except for the odd kangaroo, yeah, and maybe the odd mosquito. That's about it. There's nothing around at all. And then you have your good Kalyanamitas who think like you, who support you in your practice. You have a teacher like Ajahn Brahm who is available, yes. And whenever I do anything like traveling or I do physical work, everything I do is for charity. And what a wonderful thing it is to be able to do everything you do is for charity. You never really think about whether someone is going to give you anything in return for what you do. It gives you much more joy and happiness in all the actions you have, because it's all 100% charitable work. So the monastic life is geared towards making spiritual progress. It has all of those qualities, and that is what makes it possible. Whereas lay life tends to be geared towards worldly things, and it is there's so many hindrances. So again, even though it might be theoretically possible, the chances of achieving these things in monastic life is about 1,000 times greater, maybe 1,000,000 times greater, yeah, in monastic life than they are in lay life. And even in monastic life, there aren't that many people who actually get enlightened. Yeah, it's pretty rare. If you look around the world today, it's actually very few people who actually gain these kind of insights, even in monastic life. Far more difficult in lay life. So yeah. Anyway, there you are. Yeah.
Ajahn, can you tell us a bit about any practical?
Okay, yeah.
Practical challenges that you had in becoming a monk? That's probably like the hardest part with anything that you start, right? Just making that transition. And there may have been instances where you were thinking, or people may think, did I do the right thing? It's all too difficult. So
Yeah.
I think just to get over that initial hump, any practical challenges that you had and how you overcame that.
Sure, yeah. I think some of the hardest parts is that you have to really understand the Buddha's teachings, before you can make that really commitment with your heart properly. And this is always difficult because it's always as if you're torn between the monastic life and the worldly life. There's always going to be some degree of craving towards worldly existence, And this is the problem because it is just natural. It's kind of we tend to incline that way to a certain degree. So somehow there's going to be your ideals that draw you toward monastic life, and then there's going to be your kind of worldly cravings that kind of want to drive you back into ordinary life again. And there's going to be a little bit of a tension between those two. And in the early years, that tension is greater, and the more you understand of the Buddhist teachings, in other words, the clearer sight you have, a right view, and seeing things in the right way, the easier it is for you to overcome that draw of the sensual world that is still there, especially in the early years. And after a while, this starts to die down a little bit. That is, for me, by far the hardest part. Except for that, the rest of the things actually is fairly straightforward. One other thing that some monastics struggle with, and that is actually finding the right monastery. It's very important to find a good monastery where you can feel at ease, where you feel that people are supportive and kind and caring and compassionate. In some monasteries, it can often be maybe fault-finding, and a bit harsh environment perhaps, where you can't really relax properly. If you can't relax, meditation becomes very difficult. You have to be able to relax and enjoy the environment. So one of the things I would really recommend anyone who's interested in ordination to do, travel around to a few monasteries. Find a place that is suitable for you, a place where you feel that people have the right attitude and you feel that you fit in and you can be part of the community and you can enjoy staying there. I think that is a very important part of it. Instead of just going to the first and best monastery and think, I'm going to use this one, travel around a bit, check out a few places, and then have as much right view as you can to pull you over any hurdles that happen in the first year especially, and then I think you are in business. That is, at least for me, that's the hardest part. Actually, not in business at all. You are out of business. That's kind of the point. So you happy? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Thank you, Ajahn, and thank you, everybody. We have another session tonight, so I think we'll.
Thank you for your compassion, Eileen. That's very kind.
So the next talk is at 7:30. Why is there a Buddha? So Ajahn will give the talk, and then at 9 o'clock we have a candlelight procession downstairs as normal. We have it yearly, just doing the Namo Tassa and going round in a big circle 3 times before we go back. So that is for tonight's program. And tomorrow is Vesak Day. And so it's not here. Again, it's at Chui Hulin Club. So do be there by 8:45 to sit so that, because we have minister coming as well, so please be around. And then Ajahn will, after the minister's speech, we will have taking of the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. For those who don't know that we usually just chant together, since Ajahn is giving us the refuge and precepts, we have to chant after him. So he will give a bit of explanations for those who are new on why you take the refuge and why we take the precepts, observe the 5 precepts. So the whole Tisarana ceremony, it will take 10 to 15 minutes before Ajahns talk on the Buddha is the best. Then after that, Ajahn will stop around just an hour talk, and Ajahn will start the talk at 9:45 and end at about 10:45, and he will go and get his bowl for the Pindachara, and you all can buy the food and offer Ajahn, and Ayah Suki will be behind him with her alms bowl as well, and you can just put whatever you all buy from the stalls and put it, and the volunteers will sort it upstairs for Ajahn. And then after that, at 12 o'clock, you can have your lunch. The food will be at the stalls. There are quite a number of stalls there, as well as there are some free buffet as well. After your lunch, during lunch there will be performances and lunch, and then at 2 o'clock, Ajahn will give a short what do you call it? Description or why you give Sangha requisites, or what are requisites for the monks, and then you can offer the requisites for Ajahn. That is at 2 o'clock. So that is the program for Visa, and today, the some of, you can see the hampers are over there. And then to let you know that the AGM is on the 26th of May, Sunday. Please do come at between 2 to 4. So please stay on after the Dhamma talk on Sunday. We have our AGM and need members to be around for the AGM. And for those who like to support the Vesak Day costs and all that, donations are welcome, and you can go to the counter to give whatever donations you wish to defray some of the costs of Vesak. And Sis Sylvia Bay will be here for more Dhamma talks in early June, that is next month. Please see the notice for details. Ayah Santini will also be here for 3 days. You need to sign up for the 1-day meditation retreat. She's unavailable during weekends, so it is a weekday. So those who are interested need to take a day off. But the living with awareness meditation.
She's a very nice nun, by the way, very, very inspiring nun. So I really recommend you to see her if you can.
Yeah, so do come. Though she's more comfortable in talking in Bahasa, so she can speak English, but she's more comfortable when giving Dhamma talks or meditation in Bahasa, but someone will be translating it in English. So do come. There's 1 Dhamma talk and 1-day meditation retreat and 1-day sutta, evening sutta class. So that's all I have. And outside, there is 4 Noble Truths written by Ajahn Sumedo outside for free distribution. If you don't know what are the 4 Noble Truths and all that, do take a look and read it. So thank you, Ajahn. We will see you again.
Shall we pay respects together?
Let's pay respects to the Triple Gem first, and then Ajahn.